Snow fell like needles from the iron-gray sky, cutting the air and stealing the warmth from every living thing caught beneath it. Down the narrow wooden walkway beside the livery stable, a woman stumbled through the drifts, clutching two small children who shivered violently in her arms. Her dress was threadbare, torn at the hem and stiff with frozen blood where she had fallen earlier. Her hair was plastered to her bruised cheek, her lips pale and cracked, but she pushed forward because she had no choice. She had nowhere else to go. Her husband had died 2 months earlier after a long sickness, leaving her with nothing but debts, grief, and two little mouths to feed. She had tried to stay strong, to sew for people, to clean houses, to barter whatever scraps she had, but the storm had ruined everything. Now she was just another widow drifting through a world too cold to care. Her knees finally buckled beside a wooden post, and she lowered the children gently onto her lap. The eldest, a boy barely 4, clung to her, his tiny fingers purple from the cold. The baby cried weakly, the sound nearly swallowed by the wind. Tears stung her eyes as she pressed them closer, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. "It's okay, babies. Just hold on just a little longer." But even she could hear the desperation in her own voice. People passed distantly in the storm, silhouettes moving toward warmth and food, none of them noticing the tiny family fading slowly into the snow, until a horse's hooves thudded to a stop just feet away. The widow looked up and saw a tall, broad-shouldered rancher dismounting, snow gathering on the wide brim of his black hat. His coat was thick, lined with wool and dusted white from the storm. He moved with deliberate calm, his gloved hands steady as he approached the railing, but his eyes, warm, sharp, steady, were fixed on her with something she hadn't seen in months. Concern. The kind that didn't ask questions first, didn't judge first, didn't turn away. He knelt slowly, lowering himself to her level. "Ma'am," he said softly, his voice deep and roughened by years of working cattle and shouting over prairie winds. "How long have you been out here?" She swallowed hard, her breath shaking. I was trying to find help. The boarding house said they had no more rooms and the church doors were locked. I didn't know where else to go." Her words crumbled as the baby whimpered again. She tried to cover them with her arms, but she was shaking too violently to make it work. The rancher stared at the children, really looked. Their cheeks were swollen from cold, their clothes soaked through, their tiny bodies trembling. He inhaled sharply, anger flashing in his eyes, not anger at her, but at the world that had allowed this to happen. Slowly, deliberately, he took off his coat and wrapped it around all three of them. "Come here," he murmured, voice thick with something between urgency and resolve. "Come here, all of you." The widow froze, stunned by the warmth of both the coat and the gesture. He lifted the baby carefully, holding the child against his chest where the heat of his body began to thaw the tiny hands. Then he extended his other arm toward the older child. "I ain't leaving you here. Not in this storm. Not ever, you hear me?" The widow blinked hard as tears mixed with the melting snow on her face. Why would you help us?" Her voice cracked, fragile as thin glass. The rancher met her gaze without wavering. "Because no one should be left alone to freeze. And because I can see you've been fighting too long by yourself." He helped her stand, steadying her trembling legs, and once she found her footing, he guided her toward his horse. The wind tore at them, but he kept himself between her and the storm, shielding her as though she were something precious. When they reached the saddle, he lifted her up with surprising gentleness, placing the older child in her lap and settling the baby back into her arms. Then he mounted behind her, wrapping one strong arm around all of them to keep them steady and warm. "My ranch isn't far," he said into her ear, his voice steady despite the storm. "There's a fire waiting, food, blankets, a place to rest." As the horse pushed through the deep drifts, the widow felt, for the first time in months, something unfamiliar press against the walls of her chest. Hope, a fragile, trembling spark, but alive. They rode through the storm until the sprawling outline of a large ranch house appeared through the curtain of white. Smoke curled from the chimney, yellow light glowing through the frosted windows. The massive wooden barn beside it stood strong against the storm, a testament to the man who had built it. When they reached the porch, a ranch hand hurried outside, eyes widening at the sight of the shivering family. "Boss, what happened? Get blankets," the rancher ordered firmly, "and hot water." Now, inside, the heat hit them instantly. The widow gasped softly as the warmth washed over her frozen skin. The rancher guided her to the hearth, kneeling again to unwrap the coat and free the children. The baby started to cry, a strong, full cry this time, and the rancher actually smiled in relief. "That's good," he murmured. "Means he's waking up." Two women, the cook and the housekeeper, rushed in with blankets and warm broth. They wrapped the children, rubbing their small hands to bring back circulation, while the widow watched with disbelief and overwhelming gratitude. The rancher turned back to her and knelt once more, his expression softening. "You're safe now. You and your little ones." She opened her mouth to thank him, but before she could speak, her body finally gave in. Exhaustion swept over her like a collapsing wave, and she slumped forward. The rancher caught her instantly, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. "Easy, I've got you," he whispered. And for the first time since her husband died, she allowed herself to rest, because someone strong enough was finally holding her up. The children watched him with wide, trusting eyes as he carried their mother toward a warm room prepared just for them. In that moment, something settled in the rancher's chest, something heavy, protective, and unshakable. He didn't know these people, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let them go. Not now. Not after this. Because fate didn't drop a widow and her two children into a man's arms in the middle of a deadly winter unless it meant something. The storm raged through the night, but inside the ranch house, warmth pulsed through every room like a heartbeat. The widow awoke in a soft bed she didn't remember lying in, wrapped in wool blankets and surrounded by the crackling glow of a fireplace. For several moments she stared at the ceiling, disoriented, wondering if it had all been a dream, until the door creaked open and the rancher stepped inside carrying a tray. He paused when he saw her eyes were open. "Mornin'. You look like you're feeling a bit more human today." His tone was gentle, almost teasing. She pushed herself up slowly, blinking away sleep. Where are the children?" "In the kitchen," he replied with a small smile. "Eating more than I thought two tiny humans could possibly fit into their stomachs." A weak laugh escaped her, her first in months. He set the tray on her lap, warm bread, eggs, and tea. Her eyes widened with a hunger that was more emotional than physical. She whispered, "This is too much." "No," he said calmly, pulling up a chair. "It's not enough." She stared at him a long moment, struggling to understand a kindness she felt she didn't deserve. "Why are you doing this? You don't know me, you don't owe us anything. Ma'am, anyone with eyes could see you've been fighting battles no one should face alone. I've seen too many good people freeze out there." His voice tightened slightly. "I'm not about to let that happen again." "Never found the right reason to fill it," he murmured, glancing at her with a warmth that made her cheeks flush. Over the next few days, the widow regained strength. The children grew healthier and brighter, laughter slowly replacing fear. They followed the rancher everywhere, into the barn, the stables, the kitchen, trusting him with a devotion that surprised even him. The workers adored them, the cook spoiled them, and the rancher, well, he watched the little family with a protective tenderness he didn't bother hiding. But the widow remained torn. Every smile that warmed her heart reminded her of the life she lost. Every moment of safety made her fear it would be taken away again. And so, one morning, she told the rancher she would leave once she found work in town. His jaw clenched, but he nodded slowly. "If that's what you want." She swallowed hard. "It's not what I want, but I don't want to be a burden." He stood, walked to the window, and spoke without turning around. "You think giving your children another chance at life makes you a burden." Silence hung between them. Then he turned, his gaze steady. "You and those little ones walked into my life in the middle of a storm, half frozen and terrified. I brought you here because no one deserves to face the world alone. But somewhere along the way," he exhaled slowly, "somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you as guests I needed to help." I started seeing you as something I want to keep safe, something I care about. Her heart hammered painfully in her chest. Rancher, he took a step closer. I'm not asking for anything. I'm just telling you the truth. He paused, letting the simplicity of his words settle. That evening the storm returned fiercer than the first. The roof shook, winds shrieked, and snow smashed against the windows in violent waves. The children whimpered as thunder cracked overhead. The widow gathered them close, fear rising in her throat. The rancher rushed into the room, kneeling beside the bed. "It's okay. I'm here." The boy crawled into his arms without hesitation, and the baby reached for him, sobbing. The rancher held them both, warmth radiating from his body like a shield. Then he met the widow's eyes. Something in her broke, not in pain but in realization. She needed him. And maybe he needed her too. She whispered, barely audible, "Please, don't leave us tonight." His expression softened, deepened. "I won't. I promise." He stayed with them through the storm, his presence anchoring the room like a foundation. When the wind finally died at dawn, the boy slept cradled against his chest, the baby curled under his arm. The widow watched him, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. The rancher looked at her softly. "What is it?" She swallowed hard. "I don't want to leave anymore, not now, not ever." His breath hitched just slightly before he reached out and took her hand, his thumb brushing her knuckles with reverence. "Then stay," he whispered. "Stay, all of you. This house, this ranch, my life, it's big enough for more than just me." Her tears fell freely now, but they were different, warm, hopeful, alive. She leaned closer, resting her forehead against his. "Thank you for saving us." His voice came out thick. "You saved me too."